So before we get started, as usual, I'd like to introduce you to TechSoup Canada. Our mission is to help nonprofits use technology effectively, and we accomplish this in two ways. The first is to make technology products more affordable for our technology donations program. So we partner with tech companies such as Microsoft, Adobe, and Symantec and offer their products as either an outright donation or at a significant discount for charities, nonprofits, and libraries across Canada. Membership is free, and it gets you access to donated and discounted software from more than 30 tech companies. Through this program, we've helped over 34,000 nonprofits save more than $362 million in tech investments. The second way we try to help nonprofits use technology effectively is by creating and curating nonprofit tech resources. We write blogs, create content on social media, host events and webinars like this one to help nonprofits learn more about the technologies that help them in their day-to-day work. So if there's any topic you'd like to learn about, please let us know. We're always eager to get feedback from our members. And now for the tech stuff. So for today's webinar, you can use the GoToWebinar panel on your right-hand side to change your audio settings, enter your questions, or chat with us. At the end of the webinar presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. And just a reminder, you will be on mute. So if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to chat us in the question box. Also note that this webinar is being recorded and we'll upload the video on our website shortly. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Brady Josephson. Brady is a charity nerd, entrepreneur, digital marketer, professor, and writer. He's the Vice President of Innovation and Optimization at NextAfter, a fundraising research lab and consultancy on a mission to unleash the most generous generation in the history of the world, where he works on partnerships, research, training, and content. An international speaker whose work and writing has been featured in the Huffington Post, Christian Today, NPR, and the Chronicle of Philanthropy, among others. Brady is also host of the Generosity Freak Show, a podcast discussing how we can improve and optimize giving and generosity. Brady spent his entire career in the charitable world after working for nonprofits in technology and as a consultant before joining NextAfter. He lives just outside Vancouver, British Columbia, with his wife Liz, son Hendrix, dog Millie, and cat Thor. And I should say Brady has also been part of providing content and blogs for us. He's already written a really great post before on 6 lessons learned by signing up to more than 152 Canadian charities by email. So he brings all of that experience today, and I'll hand it to you, Brady, so we can go ahead and start the webinar.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to switch over to my slides here. Hopefully you can see those. And thank you everyone for coming out on Legalization Day. Hopefully you'll remember this presentation. Yes, that is a marijuana joke to get things started. All right. Okay, so we're here to talk about cutting through the clutter, how to optimize your year-end fundraising. So a couple quick housekeeping things. I strongly suggest you just write things down, anything and everything, preferably like with a physical pen and a physical pad. If it's an idea, if it's a question, if it's an errand you need to run, just write it down because you'll take in more information and then you'll have reference for it and you'll get the slides. So don't worry about what's going on the slides necessarily. Write down those ideas. Please ask a lot of questions. You can do that in the pane, as Yasmin mentioned, but you can also just email me, brady@nextafter.com. And if we don't get to all your questions, I will go through and respond to them as best I can. So please ask a lot of questions. I'm primarily talking about digital. There's a couple ideas that apply to direct mail, but for the most part, I am not talking about direct mail. I'm talking about digital focused campaigns for year end. And really focus on the concepts and ideas. So I work for a research lab, but we're based in Texas. So we have a lot of US examples, some conservative US examples that you may not agree with, I may not agree with, but it's the concepts and ideas that I think can help. So hopefully that's the focus and don't get too hung up on who they are and what they do. And these ideas that I'm going to share come from our research library and our experience and my experience, but you still need to figure that out for yourself. Try, test, and experiment. But hopefully you'll walk away with a bunch of ideas that you can do and implement. And this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. I know like we have ebooks and webinars and we're producing an online course on this and there's a lot of other resources out there. So this is just one kind of approach on how you can optimize your year-end fundraising. So let's get into it. Tis the season. Tis the season for eggnog. Canadians bought 5.2 million liters of eggnog in the month of December last year. And I hate eggnog. I don't know about you, but I actually find it so gross. And my mom like prides herself on her eggnog, and I hate it, so it drives her nuts. But we drink a lot of eggnog in Canada. We also will go to a lot of Christmas parties. About 79% of us will attend at least one holiday party this December. In and amongst all the family craziness, we seem to have all our office craziness as well. And then there's this guy, Michael Bublé. That is the face of a man who knows he's about to make a lot of money in the coming months. But the average Canadian will hear about 26.4 hours of Michael Bublé in December. That is a made-up stat, although it's probably close, if not a little low. It's a busy season, and that busy season impacts our inboxes. We'll eat quite a bit of spam. Each of us will receive, on average, about 3,600 emails in December alone. A different source that sometimes we use says 12,000 emails we may receive, commercial emails in December. We get a crap ton of emails in December. So at this very, very busy time, how can you cut through the clutter? Well, that's what we're going to talk about. So by the end of this webinar, hopefully you'll have, I'll share 5 kind of ways that, or 5 tips that you can cut through the clutter. And then I'm also going to give 8 other kind of proven techniques or ideas that you can use to improve your fundraising results. So let's first look at some American data. So we're talking about calendar year end in a lot of these slides and stats. And we're defining that from November 15th through December 31st. That's kind of CYE, calendar year end. And a couple key time frames in there is obviously the month of December. You've got Giving Tuesday. It's the first Tuesday after Cyber Monday, which is after Thanksgiving, which is after Black Friday, American Thanksgiving. And then you've got Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and Boxing Day is kind of key dates there in the middle. And then the last 3 days of December, or New Year's Eve in particular. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about calendar year end, which is what I will be talking about. So a couple data points for you. One, 31%. So according to our benchmarks, 31% of total annual online giving occurs in the month of December alone. 31% of all online giving happens in the month of December. Now I said our benchmarks. So this is a series of 18 nonprofit organizations that we work with and have really good access to really good data across a few different verticals. And this information is based on 2017 data. So this is kind of our benchmark. So I'll use a few other stats as well, but these are our benchmarks and what we find with our clients. So 31%, if you actually kind of chart it out across all of these different clients in the benchmark, you can see that some are as high as like 75, 76% of all their online revenue comes in December, and some are kind of low, under 10% there, but the average is about 31%. When you actually go in to these different clients and research partners that are in the benchmark, we see this type of chart over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And if you can see, just kind of as those were popping up, there's a very clear pattern in the data. It looks something like this. This is kind of the year-end revenue curve that is across our benchmarks and what we see. So I'm going to kind of break this down a little bit into these different attributes. So the first thing here is Giving Tuesday. And then the percentage of calendar year-end revenue that comes in. It's about 2.9%. So on Giving Tuesday, across these benchmarks, 2.9% of all the online giving that happens November 15th to December 31st, 2.9% was on Giving Tuesday. When we chart it out over our clients and data, you'll see some are as high as kind of 8.5%, and then there's a couple that don't really do anything, but 2.9 is the average. And when we look back to 2016, it's actually down a little bit. It was 3.8% was the average revenue share in 2016. So that's that little spike there, Giving Tuesday. And then when we move up the chart, we'll show you some dates. We get into this critical period and the chart lines are gone. There's a heavy spike that you can't see. Oh man, I'm so sorry. So what should be happening in that shaded line is this very sharp upward graph where 46% of all calendar year-end revenue comes in after Christmas. After Christmas, 46% of all of this revenue comes in. So when we chart that out across the clients, we can see that some are again are as high over 70%, and even the lowest is still above 10%. But 46% was the average that came in after Christmas, and a year ago, that was actually 48% or a little bit higher. So there's that revenue curve that I was talking about. Now this time you can see it. So you got Giving Tuesday, there's that spike in the last week. And on the very, very last day, New Year's Eve, December 31st, 16.1% of all calendar year-end revenue comes in on New Year's Eve. just in that one day, 16%. So again, we'll chart that out. Some organizations are up over 35% and a few are kind of under 5, but 16% is the average. And that's actually low or down compared to a year ago where it was 20%. So that's kind of what the year-end revenue curve looks like, where you have the Giving Tuesday spike, a big percentage that comes in the last week, and a lot comes in this last day. So what? Cool chart, Brady. Thanks. What do I actually do with this information? Well, that's what we're going to talk about, and that's what we sought to understand back in 2014 when we created this kind of aggregated donor inbox where we signed up for emails for 151 nonprofits in the US, and then we actually received 17,000 emails in the month of December. And we were trying to analyze what's the best day to send, when's the best time to start a year-end campaign, how many emails should you send, what's the best time of day, what should your email say. That's what a lot of this research comes from. So we started back in 2014, and we've been tracking it every year since. And coming next year, we'll have a Canadian version. We'll be able to do this type of analysis with 152 specific Canadian charities. We'll be able to see what Canadian organizations are doing as it relates to Giving Tuesday and year end. So look forward to that. That's because earlier this year, I did this study here in Canada called the Online Fundraising Scorecard that has these 152 organizations, a bunch of landing pages, a lot of emails in 3 key areas: sign up, donation, and email fundraising, to produce one big study. I realize now that using dollar signs in place of S isn't super useful to move away from the actual word being used there. So whoops, gotta change that. This study is actually available, and if you could please download it, that would be great, because my wife is ticked at how much direct mail I'm receiving from those 152 organizations that I will be collecting and I will be analyzing at some point. But right now it's just overflowing in like our cupboards and stuff. But you can get that whole report, bit.ly/Canadian Scorecard, or on our site. But that's separate. We're here to talk about cutting through the clutter. That's just some context about where this information is coming from. So here's the 5 tips. Tip number 1. Try sending emails on the weekends. We've looked at 57,000 plus emails since 2012, and we're trying to figure out what are the best days to send. Well, way back in 2013, the first year that we analyzed, we saw this. You can see the shaded here is weekends, and you can see how email volume drops pretty significantly on the weekends. If we actually fast forward to 2016 and 2017, we see the same types of thing, where email volume significantly drops on the weekends. So weekends may be an opportunity for you and your emails to actually stand out, because there's fewer organizations sending email. This is what we call a contra-competitive strategy, or what Hall of Fame baseball player Willie Wee Keller said, hit them where they ain't. If everyone's sending emails on a particular day, maybe you should send emails on a different day, as that's one way that you can possibly stand out. So not only can you stand out, but when we actually analyze the revenue, we actually saw this, that the average gift on those emails was up to 50% higher. So what often happens is you may get a few less opens, but this is about fundraising, so you don't care about opens. You may even get fewer clicks overall, but it's not about clicks, it's about donations. You may even get a slightly fewer donations, but you get more average gift, which compensates for revenue. So you might end up getting more revenue from more highly engaged donors, even if fewer people open or read your email. It's something worth trying. It is one thing that we see. And so tip number 1 here, to stand out, try sending emails on the weekends. Maybe that will work for you. All right, tip number 2, make December 31st a priority over Giving Tuesday. Now, I am not saying don't do Giving Tuesday. Okay, there's a lot of good stuff with Giving Tuesday. About 6.2 million people were reported to have participated in Giving Tuesday last year, and donation platforms like Canada Helps and Blackbaud, they show these dramatic increases in Giving Tuesday donations every single year. And when they actually commissioned a study to look at the impact of Giving Tuesday, they had this kind of chart, and if you see that dotted red line there, it's kind of thin, but that's actually Giving Tuesday, and you can see those little spikes, and it's growing. So Giving Tuesday is a thing, it is growing. So I'm not saying don't do Giving Tuesday. I am saying make December 31st priority number 1. I've already talked about what our benchmarks say about how much more revenue comes in on that day. But even if you look again at this chart that Giving Tuesday produced, here I've highlighted in red December 31st, and it's literally off the charts in relation to the Giving Tuesday spike. So not only is it much more significant on the revenue side in terms of amount and volume of donations being given, there's actually less email being sent on December 31st compared to Giving Tuesday. And this is, again, part of the beef that I have a little bit with Giving Tuesday. Is nothing wrong with the day, but I think there's a disproportionate amount of time, energy, and money being spent focused on Giving Tuesday without focusing on things like year-round fundraising, first of all, but the last day of the year, which again is this highly valuable day, but there's fewer people focusing on it than there are Giving Tuesday. And again, we see things like this, 790%. That's the average percent of additional revenue from email generated on December 31st compared to Giving Tuesday. So don't ignore Giving Tuesday. It's fine to do something on Giving Tuesday, but December 31st needs to be a priority. That is tip number 2. All right, tip number 3, how many emails should you send? It's a question that we get asked a lot. There's a lot of nuance in it. I'm happy to go over more in questions, but here's what we found in our aggregate inbox in terms of how many emails we received in December. 4.5% of organizations sent 0 emails in December. I don't recommend doing that. And 17% of organizations sent more than 10 emails in December. And the average was about 6. Again, think about how many emails your donors are receiving. If you're sending like no emails or very few emails, it's going to be really hard to actually reach them. So as part of this kind of online course that we're developing, we're trying as much as we can to kind of template out a campaign for you, or at least provide a bit of a starting point. So now this is kind of the timeline of our working starting point. Again, there's so much caveats and nuance, but that's not helpful when you're like, how do I run a year-end campaign? So this is kind of a starting point. Now these are American organizations, so you'll see the Thanksgiving email is obviously American Thanksgiving, but there's about 17 emails in here from November 15th to the end of the year, which is a lot. It sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. There's some emails like sending out a survey or this kind of free offer. So that's a pretty sophisticated campaign with maybe a lot of emails and you got a large list. What I'd suggest is kind of a minimum if you aren't comfortable sending 17 emails or you don't have a really large list, would be something more like this. So a couple emails in and around Giving Tuesday. It's up to you how much you want to push and promote Giving Tuesday. And then you start moving into kind of your main year-end overview ask. So you kind of introduce it. You talk about your accomplishments. Those are a little on the softer side. You have Christmas, no ask there. Just say Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, or whatever it is that you want to say. And then you push really hard in those last few days where there's this high urgency, which we'll talk about. So even that might seem like a lot of emails. I know when I had my agency, we would always recommend about 6 to 8 emails, and like none of my clients would actually take us up on it, but we'd move them away from like 3 to maybe like 5, and that was a move in the right direction. Just again, remember your donors are getting 3,600 emails, and if you're trying to reach them by only sending 1 or 2, it's going to be very, very difficult. So whether you send 8 or 18, the idea is you got to find that sweet spot for you and your donors. And I think these 2 red zones are maybe like high risk zones. So like if you're sending less than 6, I think it's going to be really hard to cut through. And if you're sending more than 20, there's a good chance you're going to be burning people out and maybe ticking them off or maybe burning some bridges. So find that sweet spot for you. Maybe it's somewhere between kind of 6 to 8 to 16 to 18, something like that. Now, again, it's tough because there's a lot of nuance and caveats. And the other caveat or thing that I need to mention is sending a crappy, impersonal, irrelevant email is always bad. So in the discussion around frequency, we always need to be talking about quality. If you send very well-crafted, meaningful, personal emails to donors about giving opportunities or stewardship and how they're making a difference and ways they can get involved, and you can send a lot of emails. I don't know if you subscribe to some emails or some bloggers that they email you every day, and it's great because it's great content. If you send great emails, you can send a lot of emails. If you send crappy emails, you can send like no emails. So quality's in there as well. But the overarching point here is you probably need to send more emails in order to reach your donors and kind of cut through this busy time. One way to send quality emails is to send emails that look and feel like they are from a real person. So I'll show you what I mean, but also why. Why should you do that? Well, we've got quite a bit of research that shows you can actually get more opens this way. So here's an experiment where the only difference was instead of sending from the organization on the left, we sent from a person. In this case, it was the ED or CEO on the right, Kent Lossman. And by doing that, we helped increase email opens 28%. or a different version of this experiment. The only difference here is it was sent from a person, but in one example, A here, we had the organization after a comma, and we just removed that. Just by removing the organization, helped increase email opens 18%. And we do testing on our own emails. This is Tim Kachuriak, he's my boss. We have our company next after, and when we had it, it decreased email opens 9.1% and decreased clicks or engagement 20.7%. So sending emails from a real person and not an organization can maybe help you get more opens. Another reason why is these personal emails can maybe help you get more donations. So here's a couple other experiments. So this is 4174 in a research library, if you care to look at it. But you can see here on the left, we have the control, and it looks like kind of typical email, header image and copy and a button. And in this case, the treatment is much more simplified, kind of stripped down. And here's what we found: increased clicks and a large increase in donations. And it's not like this other email was bad or something, crazy fancy or anything like that. It felt a little bit more like marketing, the preview text and the logo and the header, as opposed to the treatment, which felt a little bit more personal. So we actually took this concept and said, well, what if we even try stripping this down and making it more personal? And what would that look like? So we took that winning version and tried a different treatment. In this case, the winning treatment helped increase donations 145%. So we put those side by side. We'll look a little bit closer of what we actually did. But one, we reduced the logo placement. So it wasn't the first thing you said. Like, we love our logos, but most people don't care about your logo. So we just moved it to the bottom. We moved the button or the call to action away from a button and to a hyperlink. When you send your friend a link or an email and say, hey, check this out, you're probably not coding in a big button. You're probably sending a hyperlink. So that's what we did here as well on the design front. But then we also took this approach over to the copy. So if you look at these two different sides of things, or the text, how we started the email on the left there is when your world has been turned upside down, every connection counts, every bit of strength, every heart brought together. Like, it's this beautiful opening statement. Whereas on the right, it's like, I know you've been using Caring Bridge recently to stay connected to your loved ones, and I hope it's been a source of strength for you. Which one of those two sounds like something a human would actually write to another human? Probably the one on the right. The other one on the left sounds like an English major who you hired to write a direct mail piece, which sounds beautiful, but it doesn't sound like a human. And it kind of carries on. So on the left here, it's like Erica, who's 6-month son, and goes into this kind of preachy story. Where on the right, it's a little bit more personal. Like, right now, we're in this short campaign to help you and those like you who need a safe, protected place during life's most difficult times. We can carry over this personal approach, not just through design and kind of limiting design, which is something to test, but through our tone and voice. Does it sound like it's written by a human to another human? Because that's what really fundraising is about, and it's a way to help increase donations. So another reason why, my PowerPoint just shut down, so I'm going to refire that up. Another reason why is that you can actually stand out from others. So in the Canadian Online Fundraising Scorecard research that we did, we found that very few organizations are actually sending emails from a person. And we also found that very few organizations are sending emails that look and feel as if they are sent by a person. So only 3% of organizations sent emails that looked like a personal solicitation. And only 23% of organizations sent emails that were from a person. So this is what I mean. Sorry about that crash again. So 77% of emails came from organizations, and only 3% of organizations sent emails that felt or looked like a personal solicitation. So these personal emails operate on this principle of people give to people, not email marketing machines. And you can get more opens, you might be able to get more donations, and it's a way to stand out from others while doing that. All right, so tip number 4, you can try sending emails that look and feel like they're from a real person. And last tip of this first section, hopefully my computer doesn't crash anymore, is try sending emails at off-peak hours. So when is the best time to send? We looked at days, possibly sending over weekends, but what is the actual best time to send? Everyone is sending email typically around the same time. So we charted out all the different emails that are being sent. And here's what we found is that they kind of cluster in around this Tuesday through Friday, around 7 a.m. to noon. It's this kind of heavy period that's in red. And that means that there's these lighter areas where there's less email volume early in the morning, afternoon, and evening that are less crowded. So maybe those are some times of day that you might be interested in sending your emails. I've also seen some studies or some research that shows donations are more likely to happen in the afternoon or evening because people are kind of more bored at work. They're looking for more distractions. And on the e-commerce side, we're more likely to purchase things kind of noon and onwards. So that could also influence donations. So that's some possible times that you might be interested in sending an email. So that's tip number 5. Here's the recap of those 5 tips to kind of cut through. Send emails on the weekends. Make December 31st a priority. Try sending more emails. Try sending emails that look and feel like they're from a person, and try sending emails on off-peak hours. So those are some tips that you can cut through the clutter. But now I'm going to move to kind of 8 other ideas from the research lab that can be applied to year-end fundraising, but also just kind of fundraising in general. So these come from our research lab. I mentioned that we are a research lab. We do 2 types of research, those kind of mystery donor studies, as well as these A/B experiments. And so all of these ones that I've shown you and will show you are publicly accessible in our research library, where you can kind of search by advertising or donation page or by client, and you can click into them and you can actually see what our hypothesis was, what the control and the treatment was, what the actual results were and the impact on the metrics, and a summary of key learnings. So these are just kind of 8 plus that we've kind of pulled out to help you here in this year-end fundraising period. All right, so idea number 1 comes from experiment 6404, but it pays to thank donors before your year-end campaign. So in this case, the client or the research partner was Hillsdale College. It's a small liberal arts school in Michigan. And they just sent a thank you postcard out prior to the year-end fundraising campaign. It went out around Thanksgiving. It was just a short personal note. You can see it there in the bottom right. And then it had a URL to a special video message. The video was the same, but everyone had a different access code. So it kind of felt exclusive. And it just kind of said, thanks for past support, and thanks for being a part of the community, that kind of thing. Here was the cover or the front of the postcard. So it was personalized to someone. So John, in this case, it was personalized to John. And we were able to actually split up the 2 groups. So we split into the groups that only received the postcard and groups that did not receive the postcard. Now, the group that received the postcard ended up giving 204% more. Here's the results here. You can see that large difference in conversion rate from the people who received the postcard versus not. It operates on a couple principles. One is reciprocity. Once we receive something of value, even a thanks could be considered a value, but that personal video, we're more likely to then give. And then this other concept of priming, which a couple other examples I'm going to show you play off. So that's one thing. Thank your donors kind of strategically in advance of an upcoming appeal or campaign. All right, another idea here is visually remind your donors that their donation is secure. So experiment ID 5991. This is CaringBridge. So CaringBridge offers those kind of personal blogging sites for people who are healing or recovering, often like cancer and those types of things. And what we're trying to figure out is, can we increase donations by just visually enforcing how secure this page is? So this is what their page looked like, and this was the treatment. So in this case, we shaded that kind of personal information box and just added that little icon on the lockbox. And that helped increase donations 14% in this case. What's interesting about this experiment and the increase in donations is the padlock icon. That's not a security feature. The page was secure and remained secure. All we did was kind of mention visually that, oh, by the way, your information that you're putting in is secure. We've ran this experiment a few other times. So from this to this, you see that we kind of shaded it and put a lockbox in there again and helped increase donations 10%. The average online donor is probably about 65 or 67 years old. That's what our research shows. Our research actually is a little bit higher. We find 72% of all transactions come from 55 and up. So you may disagree, but I challenge you to look at your own Google Analytics or your own donor database and see the average age of the online donor, but it's probably older than you think. And security is even more important for older donors. They want to make sure that they're not falling victim to credit card fraud and things like that. So these little security measures may seem like a pretty, benign thing, but it can make a pretty big difference. So think about how you can visually reinforce security, whether it's the shade in the lockbox or something like secure site and things like that. Also on the donation page, something else that you can do that's a pretty easy optimization is remove distracting and unnecessary links on your donation page. So here's an example from this up top to this down below. You'll see the navigation and the control and the no navigation in the treatment. And just by removing all those other links and a donate button that you don't really want people to click because they're already on the donate page, helped increase donations 195%. Or a different version or a different form of this. Here, there's all this other stuff like ways to give and bequest giving and pledge giving and links away from the page versus this on the right. We just removed that. Helped increase donations about 5.5%. It's a very, very large organization, so 5.5% is pretty significant for them. But in addition to removing the kind of distracting links, the other thing is you can see on the left, it's a 2-column kind of approach. And our eyes pretty much hate 2-column approaches. We don't really know where to look, and so we end up kind of going down and up and over and all over the place, whereas on the right, it's pretty linear and straight down. So it's a combination of easier on the eyes, but also removing those distracting links. And unfortunately, we saw a lot of distracting links when we made those 152 donations to Canadian organizations. 75% of organizations in the study had these distracting buttons or menus or navigational elements on the landing page. And 46% of organizations had multiple calls to action on the donation page that took you away or were asking you to do something other than make a donation. And the result is something like this, like your donor's there to make a donation, but then it's like, ooh, what's this about? There's other ways to give besides making a donation right now. Like, what else can I do? You want to remove those distractions. They've already shown interest in making a donation. So streamline it, remove the distractions. Here was one of the worst examples that we saw in the study. I'm going to highlight all these different links here. This is after we've clicked donate. So you can see link, 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 link. And then a donate button, even though they're already on the donate page. And you scroll down and we see even more links. I think there was about 150 or so different links on this donation page that took you away from the page. And as bad as that is, this was only step one of a few steps to actually complete a donation. This is a friction that donors have to put up with, and a lot of them won't. It's distracting, they may never come back, or they might just get frustrated with where to go and leave. So remove those unnecessary links and distractions. All right, make your case for support before you make your ask. This is kind of an interesting one. It's with a conservative organization in the States called Heritage Foundation. They have a really popular blog called The Daily Signal that actually receives 2 million visitors per month. And what they were trying to do here is saying, can we kind of steward and kind of prime our audience similar to that postcard example, but use online content. So they published blog articles leading up to their campaign and kind of during their campaign that showed the need or they highlighted their impact throughout. So for example, like how your donation makes a difference and your support for the Daily Signal is critical. They put in these content pieces throughout their campaign. And because so many of their visitors are actual subscribers, we were able to actually isolate the subscribers who saw those articles versus the subscribers who didn't. And then we were able to look at their giving behavior. So a couple key points here though. Those articles did not ask for a donation and they did not contain a link to a donation. They were just highlighting the need and the impact. That's a key point here when it comes to priming. They weren't asking and they didn't even have it as an option. In the end, people who just saw those articles about need and impact gave almost 3 times more than those who didn't. 196% increase in donations. So now you may not have a blog that has 2 million people that visit it, but you definitely have content and you definitely share content throughout the year. This is why this divide between marketing, communications, and fundraising is so damaging, because communications, even if it's not asking, is hugely important to your fundraising. Roger Craver, who wrote a book called Retention Fundraising, in his research, he found that the fundraising side of things only accounted about 20% of a donor's lifetime value, The other 80 was made up of things like communications and stewardship and customer service and things like that. So we kind of reject and deny the use of content, good content, at our own peril. So it's something, whether you, again, you have your own blog, you can publish those articles, or even sending more emails throughout the year, again, kind of priming and educating your audience on what's going on and the impact that they and you are having is the strategy that you can employ. So similarly, you can also prime your audience using online tools for your upcoming offline appeal. So this was with that Hillsdale College that I mentioned before with the postcard. In this case, we're looking at direct mail. How do we grow their direct mail revenue? Something that I think a lot of people are interested in. And so we said one group is just going to get direct mail, and in another group, we're going to create this audience that sees Facebook ads. We showed them these ads for about 2 weeks before the mailbox, their piece at the mailbox, and about 2 weeks after, which is kind of the prime time for people to respond. These ads were optimized for reach, not clicks. And again, significantly, these ads were not asking or had a link to a donation. They were about content or information or videos, things like that. And in the end, here's what we found. The direct mail people who gave offline gave 230% more, 239% more often, and 150% more overall, even if they never actually clicked a Facebook ad. Just by seeing those in their subconscious, they were more likely to respond and give to the direct mail appeal. That's that concept of priming. So we actually had a Canadian organization see that study in our research library, and it's like, wow, that seems pretty cool and actually pretty easy to do, so let's try it. And so they ran this experiment for themselves, and they saw a 25% increase in offline revenue. And for them, they actually only spent $690 on Facebook ads, and it helped grow their direct mail revenue by almost $10,000. So, you know, talk about kind of an ROI type strategy. That's a pretty high yield and a pretty high net gain for something that's relatively easy to do. And it's this concept of priming. Again, they weren't sending these ads out, 6 months before. It's pretty strategic, 2 or 3 weeks before and a couple weeks after, just kind of that prime time response. So that's something that you can try as well. Another one is let donors know the progress of your campaign. So whether you're doing a Giving Tuesday campaign or a year-end campaign, if you have a stated goal, why not share it? So here's an experiment that has a fundraising kind of thermometer bar versus no thermometer bar, and without it actually decreased giving by about 6.5%. Or another example where no bar on the left and we had a bar on the right helped increase giving with the bar about 20.5% in this case. So why does this work? Well, let's go to a little bit of science here. In this book, Science of Giving, there's a study that actually ran a similar research experiment where they sent 3 different appeals, and one they said we're 10% of the way to our goal, another one they said we're 66% of the way to our goal, and another one said we're 85% of the way to our goal. And donation rates increased dramatically when they found that the goal was 85% of the way there. And there was actually less benefit. It was detrimental when they mentioned that they were at 10% of the goal. There's this principle called goal proximity effect, is what these thermometers and that study operates on, where we're more likely to take an action at the end of a sequence or to help complete a goal. It helps us, we feel like we're making a bigger impact, even though it's the same $100 that we would have given either way. And that's why if you have a bar and it's empty, it actually is worse, because it's like, man, there's no way we're gonna succeed, or like, I'm the first or the only. So this is why often in campaigns, you actually won't show that bar until you're at least 50% of the way there. Otherwise, it's kind of demotivating. But if you have a goal and you're making progress towards a goal, show your donors that goal. All right, another thing from the research library that we've seen is if the goal is donations, consider using text and not video. So here's a few examples. Here's one where the control, we have a video, and then in the treatment, what we did in the treatment here is actually we just transcribed that video and just slapped that text onto a landing page. So we didn't even, use crazy different copy or anything like that. We just took what the person said in the video and just put it in text. And just by doing that, it helped increase donations 560%. You can see the huge difference in conversion rate and what it means for average gift and revenue. What's so interesting is that videos have kind of 2 negatives towards them when it comes to conversion. One is a distracting factor. Again, it's easy to kind of get distracted, and then you're like, oh, I watch more videos, or what's the next video, or something like that. But then you also actually get a little bit of a boost, a little bit of an endorphin reward for just watching videos. And that can even alleviate some of that burden or responsibility you feel to give, because you're like, oh, I feel good now. I don't need to give to feel good. I just watched this video. So we ran this a few other times where we used a video versus text, and text helped increase donations 203% in this case, or in this page. With no video was the control, and the treatment had the video. The one with the video helped decrease donations 77%. Now, I'm not saying don't use videos. Videos are great for storytelling, for sharing. They're really good at getting clicks. But when it comes to conversion, the last point, the action, email sign up, or donations in this case, they're often pretty poor because they're kind of distracting and don't engage people at the same way that a text can. And then kind of the last key point, I think it's the last key point on this kind of fundraising research lab side, is urgency is your best friend. So one way to think about an appeal or making a case for support is you have to answer these questions. Is why should someone care about the cause? Why should they care about you? And then, like, why should they care right now? And it's often right now that's the hardest part. And so in our study, we looked at urgency, and we found that this is hard. It's hard for organizations to communicate urgency throughout the year. 105 organizations we thought had no urgency. Only 9 conveyed a sense of urgency. So this is the opportunity at year end where there's that hard endpoint for tax receipts and end of year, and we can kind of create this sense of urgency. So why not use it to your advantage? So here's an example where I'll kind of zoom in here in a second, but we had a countdown clock. We basically just said, here's how much time is left in the campaign, and it helped increase donations 68%. We're kind of preying on this sense of urgency and perceived urgency and just made it visual. Similar to kind of page is secure, we just made it visual. The clock is counting down, and we just made it visual. You can apply this concept to emails. So here we kind of had the deadline, helped increase response rate 51.6%. You can even try it in ads. This is like a Dear Reader ad in the middle of a content page or a blog page. Countdown clock there helped increase donations 61%, or a different version in an email that's kind of more personal and just kind of an embedded little widget. Countdown helped increase donations 65% in that case. So we have this urgency, we can use it to our advantage, but you got to be careful that you're not trying to be too urgent for too long. It can be kind of tiring or seem unreasonable. So here's with one campaign, we tracked the conversion rate when we use this clock, and you'll see that the conversion rate one is in yellow there, and the non-clock one is in blue. And it only kind of crossed over significantly once we started getting into the last kind of few days or week of the campaign, or before the end of this year-end campaign. And so if you're trying to be too urgent too long, it can maybe be exhausting. Or if it's like there's only 35 days left, it's like, oh, I got 35 days to give. So if you are going to use a countdown clock, you maybe want to use it a little bit later, kind of last week or maybe 2 weeks. But more than that, it starts feeling like it's not actually that urgent and just maybe kind of annoying. So the other key point here is you do have December 31st. You have this end of season. It's a reason for people to give now. You should use it. But it isn't the reason to give, period. It's a reason to give now. It's the same thing with a match campaign. A match campaign isn't the reason to give overall. It's a way for them to give now and kind of have a bigger impact. So don't just say give because it's December 31st. You still have to answer the value proposition question, or answer the question in the donor's mind. Why should I give to you compared to another organization, or not at all? If you can't answer that question, then December 31st, December 15th, it doesn't really matter. You have to answer that question first, and then you can leverage the fact that it's December 31st. So those were the 8 ideas that you can apply kind of all year long, but as well to the year-end campaign. So thank you, donors, before. Visually remind them that it's secure. Remove those distracting links. Make the case of support before you ask. Prime your audience online for offline appeals. Let donors know the progress of your campaign. The goal is donations. Use text, not video. And urgency is your best friend. So I'm just kind of, touching the surface on a lot of this stuff. You can download this full study. We're updating it for 2017 numbers with all these kind of data points, and cut through the clutter. We'll have a Canadian one next year. I mentioned we are launching an online course. It's a free online course that has, I think, 4 modules on running a year-end campaign. So you can check that out, and we'll dive deeper into things like this. And we're having a teaser webinar October 30th. And you can find all this stuff on our website at nextafter.com. So that is all I have for you for today. Thank you so much. I think we have some time for questions. So I think Yasmin's going to hop on, but you can also email me, Brady at nextafter.com, or on Twitter at Brady Josephson.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brady. That was a really great presentation. Definitely a lot to learn, including about Michael Bublé, apparently, and eggnog. But now we have some time to take the questions from the audience. So if you haven't entered your questions, please do so now using the questions in the chat box in your GoToWebinar panel. And I do want to apologize if there is a little bit of an echo when I'm speaking, but I've adjusted the volume, so hopefully it'll be a little bit better. All right, so a few questions were actually sent about the idea of having a personal name in the sender. So the question was, how do you avoid potential donors? How do you have them not treat your email as spam or junk if they do not recognize the name of your organization?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one, on email deliverability, what we've seen is emails that come from a person are actually more likely to be delivered to someone's inbox, particularly in Gmail, like the inbox tab, as opposed to spam or promotions. So now if you send it from someone that they've never heard of or don't know, there is a chance that they'll mark it as spam. So that is a worry, but our research indicates that you'll get more engagement, you'll get more replies back, you'll get more opens, you'll get more donations. And so if you get a couple more spam, it's going to be worth it, but that's definitely worth monitoring as well.
Awesome. I mean, I was surprised as well that there was such a difference for sure. And it got me thinking, and this was a question people asked as well, about the age demographic of receiving these emails.
Meaning like are like younger people more likely to open personal emails versus older people or something like that?
Yeah, so how much of it depends on the age demographic of receiving emails? And if there's a demographic that isn't donating by receiving emails, could they be, for example, the type to just go straight to the organization itself and not rely on?
Maybe. So I'd say two things. One, I don't actually know the demographic breakdown across all those experiments on personal versus non-personal. What I would say is the majority of our campaigns target 55 to 65-year-olds, or maybe 45 as like a young donor, because that's who is giving, and that's who's most likely to make a donation, especially a significant donation. So that's who we think you should be targeting your strategies towards, which isn't to say you ignore 20-year-olds, but the reality is your job is to raise money, and 45 to 65s and even up are more likely to give money, and that's who you should tailor your strategies to. I do think that the concept of people give to people, not email machines, applies to any single person demographic for the most part. No one wants to get marketed to. We don't want to get marketing emails, and it's actually a big difference between fundraising and, say, like selling shoes. Is I wake up in the morning and I have these kind of quick impulses to maybe buy things, and so I get this nice looking email. It's like, sale, buy these cool shoes, and it's like, ooh, that's interesting. That's a very different motivation and process than someone who gives. We don't wake up in the morning generally and say, oh, I want to give my money away. We need to be kind of communicated with in a much different way, in a much different level when it comes to fundraising than we do with like buying stuff. And so, not to say that we can't learn from for profit, but generally speaking, it needs to be a lot more personal, a lot more relevant than for-profit marketers need to do. And being personal and sending more stripped down emails is one way that we've seen success to do that.
Yeah, that's great. And mentioning that stripped down with a more sort of pure text layout, another question we had was, would that risk making an organization look unprofessional? So perhaps a donor might think twice about donating to the organization if it looks smaller or less sophisticated, versus putting the things like the buttons you said that you removed and instead displayed as a hyperlink. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think that's part of the reason why it works. In the direct mail world, we've seen these types of experiments where like crappy paper and like poorly produced things, even spelling mistakes, have produced more fundraising results than more professional and more polished things. And that's because donors want to feel like their donation's making a difference and that their money is needed. So even when we make cases for support, when it's like, look at how great we are, and here's all of our impact, but we don't leave need and we don't leave room for the donor goes like, cool, good luck. Like, you don't need me. And so actually by coming across as like too designed or too fancy, it can actually have the opposite effect, where people go, wow, they're really polished. They maybe don't need my help. So I do think there's a bit of a generational line on that side of things, where younger donors, I think, value kind of quality of design and kind of that kind of thing, more than maybe older donors. But the other thing here is, like, if you have a question about, should we send from this, should we send from that, should we design it, go test it. Go test it. It's the easiest way to figure it out for yourself. And then, so what we're trying to get at is, so many times you'll attend webinars or conferences and people are telling you what to do, but they provide no evidence or no research behind it. They're just saying it. And so, or you sit around boardrooms and go, well, I think we should do this. And someone says, well, I think we should do this. And whoever, is the highest paid person in the room or is the highest ranking, then you do what they say. And like, I just think that's a terrible way to go about making decisions about important things like fundraising. So we have the ability to run these tests. So just test it. Do one like your normal design and do one without. And maybe you'll find that your donors really appreciate the design. Great. Maybe they don't operate the same way. But the key part of all of this is that you need to be kind of testing this stuff for yourself. And this is just what our research in an overarching way shows.
For sure. And then in that testing, have their tests been done between doing campaigns that are specific, or is it doing a special project? So for example, someone did ask, is it fine to make a general appeal, or if you are targeting it to the end of year, do you want it to be as specific as possible?
Yeah, it's a good question. So generally speaking, being more tangible, or something that donors can wrap their heads around, is better than something that's more vague. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to get really, really specific. That question that I mentioned earlier, in our opinion, is the question you have to answer, is why should I give to you rather than another organization, or not at all? You can answer that question in a kind of general way, but you need to still answer that question. It is often useful to be tangible. Impact anchors, $50 does this. That often helps. This is where things like matching incentives can also help, because it seems like the donation is going further. So normally what you'll do, like year long, you'll have kind of a more general, especially on like your donation page, you'll have kind of the most inclusive message for your target audience as possible, because people are coming from all over. You don't know where they're coming from. But in a campaign, like, you kind of control the message. You're pointing people there from your emails and from your ads. So you do have the opportunity to be a little bit more specific, and that typically does help donors, especially donors who are new or don't know you as well. Being more tangible and kind of specific generally helps them. So I think that's a real opportunity in some of these campaigns, is that you can get a little bit more specific, as opposed to year long, where you maybe need to be a little bit more general.
And speaking of the sort of the newer asks, one question was from a small organization saying they're launching their first fundraising campaign. They're unsure how much to raise. So the question was, should they try to set their goal low at first and then add an extended goal if they make it early, or should they aim a little higher with the risk of not making the goal?
Yeah, definitely the former. So it's always better to have a lower goal that you reach, and then you deal with the problem of, do we raise the goal? Do we just keep it the same? I've seen the kind of, once you reach your goal, it has kind of like a no effect. It's not extra inspiring, but it's not necessarily demotivating. It's just kind of neutral. So I'm more in that camp of kind of aim for a lower goal, make sure you reach it, maximize that goal proximity effect, and then you deal with the challenge of, oh, we've already reached our goal. Like, this is amazing. You can consider extending or upping it or something like that. As opposed to saying like, wow, we're going to raise $100,000, and then you raise 5 and everyone feels terrible. Like that happens a lot. We're optimists by nature in this space. Otherwise we wouldn't be in this space. And so normally the advice, especially if you're doing a campaign for the first time, is like, come up with a campaign number and then probably cut it in half. That's probably more realistic as a starting point. And then again, sometimes you don't want to actually make that public or known or stated until you're sure you've raised about 50% of it. So that would be the other thing is, for year-end campaign, say December, you do your best to raise money towards your goal for 2 weeks, find out where you're at, and then you kind of set a goal for the last 2 weeks. After you already have some money in the bank, you kind of realize whereabout you're going to go. That's a different way. Because the other thing that we do with goal setting is like, oh, we need $100,000 for this project. Our goal is $100,000. And you don't necessarily have to do that. You could need $100,000 for a project, but say for this campaign, we're only going to raise $20,000 to 20% of this project. The need doesn't have to be your campaign goal, and oftentimes it shouldn't, because that sets you up for not having success.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And another question was actually about the asking for stats to see if the organization has not really sent many emails out to contacts, but wants to like significantly increase them for the end of year ask. Do you know of any experiments where the giving was actually diminished instead of increased?
No, so not in the short term. Generally speaking, the more email you send, the more money you raise. There's some people who believe in kind of like a scorched earth strategy, where you just every email you keep emailing until you basically stop raising money. I don't think that's a good strategy, because long term you're going to lose a lot of emails. So one of the points I didn't really make, but the best way to have success in a year-end campaign is being good at communications the other 11 months of the year. It's really hard to just kind of turn it on, and now we're going to advertise, and now we're going to market, and now we're going to email you. You need to do it this time of year, but it's going to be harder to do because you haven't been doing the work all year long. So yes, you should increase your email volume, but then if you go too hard, you'll lose some emails, and then you're in a position where you have to find more emails. Otherwise, you will be in the kind of a diminishing cycle. But there's a certain element of churn or email loss that's just natural. It's about 15 to 20%. People move, they change, they just don't want to hear from you anymore. You're going to lose about 20% of your emails every single year, regardless of what you do. And one of the biggest things about why people unsubscribe is a lack of communication. So they get an email, they'll go 3 months without anything, and then they get another email. And by that point, your deliverabilities may be shot, or maybe they go, who is this person? I don't remember signing up. This is spam. So we've actually seen that not sending email frequently is actually one of the worst things to do for an email program. So being consistent all year long and then ramping up a bit at year end is a better strategy. So if you're kind of starting from scratch, you might want to be a little cautious of how aggressive you go, but then start working towards a stronger email program next year, so you're not in the same position.
Got it. Now the next question, because it is not often that we can talk about fundraising without mentioning tax receipts and tax reasons. One of the questions is, do you think December 31st is driven primarily for tax reasons? And is there a difference in the US versus Canada on that?
So the tax receipt is really, really interesting. So only about 22% of Canadians claim any sort of charitable deduction, but it's hard to say for sure because we don't do it, but about 80%, 75% to 80% of Canadians actually give to charity. So there's this huge discrepancy between people who give and people who file. And so all that to say, I think we overinflate the value of the tax receipt for donors. So I think December 31st is a combination of the tax receipt, and even if people don't claim it, they think that it's more valuable than it is. And if they think it, then to a degree it's true. But I also think there's an element of like closing out the year. They've just had this season of excess. They've been with family. There's a lot of other kind of macro ingredients around Christmas and year end that help lead to generosity, not just the tax receipt. And then we've also kind of been conditioned that way. So it's a little chicken egg, right? So I'm telling you to send more emails on December 31st. You'll raise more money on December 31st. Donors get conditioned to give on December 31st, and away we go. And so again, there's a few different things going into it, but in reality, when we do tests, or if you do tests on like the value of a tax receipt, you'll see that it's actually not nearly as important as like who the cause is and the work that you're doing. It's kind of an added benefit. That's slightly different for people with like significant wealth. Like if I give or don't give, it's not going to make that big of a difference on my taxes, but for some people it's a big deal. And in the US now, it's actually less of a big deal. They've doubled the standard deduction. So many Americans don't even come close to being able to get a tax break for their gift. So the tax receipt's actually less valuable in the States than it is in Canada, where we get pretty generous, one of the most generous tax contributions back to us for any country in the world, actually. So even for us, though, I still don't think it's as valuable as donors say or as we might think.
Okay, well, that's great to know. And I think that's all the time we have for today. So I really want to thank you, Brady, again for sharing your knowledge with us. And I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time out of your day to join us. And just a reminder, we'll post the webinar recording and slides on the website within a week. And also, please fill out the post-webinar survey that will launch after the session if you have any additional questions or if we weren't able to answer your question today. Thanks so much, Brady. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.